The government is facing a backlash from foreign aid groups after the recent announcement that hundreds of millions of dollars are being directed from Australia's foreign aid budget to accommodate increasing numbers of asylum seekers on Australian shores. Foreign Minister Bob Carr recently confirmed that $375 million will be redirected from the foreign aid budget to be spent on facilitating the lives of onshore asylum seekers, and that such amendments are in line with global guidelines set out by the OECD, the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development.
Money on refugees and potential refugees on your own soil is to be counted as if you were spending money on refugees or potential refugees in refugee camps around the world.
Aid groups, however, do not feel the same. They believe that by dipping into the foreign aid budget, they will cripple needy overseas communities. A World Vision representative from the National Youth Movement, Hamish Mackenzie, told of the impact that such cuts have had on less fortunate overseas communities.
Our revenue as an organisation is about $350 million per year, just for World Vision Australia. And if we didn't do that, we couldn't help the 120 million people that we help. And that's just World Vision Australia. There's World Vision, Hong Kong, Canada, US, all that kind of stuff. And without money, we simply can't do what we do. And it's really, it really becomes quite clear when you go to our programs in the developing world and you see where we stop working and the differences between the communities literally drawn across an often arbitrary geographical boundary. Where the cash stops, we have to stop our programs, and then, it sounds really bleak, but we're actually dealing with poverty and extreme poverty, and, we're saving lives, and when we can't do that, then people die. So it is very much a case of we can only do as much as our supporters allow us.
While more money will be injected from the foreign aid budget to provide food and associated costs to asylum seekers, Senator Bob Carr said that no foreign aid projects will be cut, simply delayed. Yet World Vision's Mr Mackenzie said that delays in funding are equally as damaging as cutting funds altogether, with numerous people overseas suffering from the previous aid cuts made in 2011.
So when money starts to be diverted out of that budget, then that definitely cuts into World Vision's individual budget, definitely, and constrains what we can do. And we've seen time and time again since sort of 2011, this current government make more and more decisions to cut, delay, postpone the aid budget, which is really making it extremely difficult for us to operate and for all organisations to operate. And ultimately, the only people who lose from this are mums and kids in the developing world who we can't help. And we know that when we cut aid, or we defer it, or whatever the word is, it's the mums and the kids who are the most vulnerable, the first to miss out on food and education, healthcare and stuff like that. So the government's decision last year to defer the aid budget was going to affect somewhere between 300,000 and 400,000 lives lost, basically, with women and children overseas. And that's a statistic that we can't run from. And Bob Carr, the Foreign Minister, tried to sort of prevaricate and avoid that reality. But when we're dealing with our foreign aid budget, that is what we're talking about. And I think we have to accept, as a country, if we're not willing to put money into aid, then we have to accept exactly what we're doing. And we're saying we don't care enough about these people's lives to send a few bucks overseas.
The move to redirect funds comes after Australia recently won a temporary 2-year seat on the UN Security Council, making commitments to contribute 0.5% of their gross national income to UN aid. Opposition leader Julie Bishop said that this swift budget cut is deceitful and damages Australia's international reputation.
This sends a very bad message for the beginning of Australia's 2-year stint on the United Nations Security Council. It was a key plank of the government's campaign to win a seat that they would be increasing the foreign aid budget to 0.5% of GNI. In fact, they have misled countries into voting for them with this deceitful attempt to redirect the foreign aid budget. The Australian people have learned that they can't trust Julia Gillard's word. Now, people around the world cannot rely on her word. Bob Carr's excuses and spin cannot disguise the fact that this funding is for overseas development. It is not being spent overseas, and it is not being spent on development. The people smugglers now have more control over Labor's budget than the Gillard government does.
Hamish McKenzie is a Melbourne-based political activist and agrees with the opposition leader in saying that this aid cut is shameful, with the government more concerned with the budget surplus rather than those in need.
Just that the latest announcement by the government is pretty shameful, really. We've just been given a seat on the UN Security Council, and a huge part of our bid was that we're a good international citizen and our aid budget is increasing all the time and we're doing all these really good things overseas. And so for us to get that seat and then turn around a couple of months later and not only have this horrific policy towards refugees and asylum seekers, but to do this relatively shameful act of diverting funds from our aid budget, to sort of get the budget back in the black and everything. It is yet another appalling act by a government who's desperate to get into a budget surplus, and they're taking it out on people who can't vote, who can't be out in the streets protesting, and yet who are going to suffer all the same.